Imagine a weapon that promised to be 4 guns in one. A compact assault rifle for close quarters, a suppressed carbine for stealth, a rifle with serious armor-piercing punch, and a built-in grenade launcher for room clearing, all in a single modular package you could reconfigure in the field. That was the sales pitch behind the Russian OTs 14 Groza, a bullpup built in the chaos of the 1990s that looked like the ultimate Spetsnaz Swiss army knife. It took the guts of a Kalashnikov, squeezed them into a compact body, fed them with heavy-hitting subsonic ammo, and then hung a 40mm grenade launcher under the barrel to create a so-called universal assault weapon. But if the idea was so good, why did only a few hundred kits get made? Why did most units quietly go back to more traditional rifles? And where exactly did this big promise of versatility start to fall apart? Stay in this video, because today we are going to break down not just what made the Groza so unique, but also the specific design, logistic, and tactical details that kept it from becoming the game changer it wanted to be. To understand where the Groza's promise of versatility broke down, we first need to understand what it was trying to do. In the early 1990s, Russia was dealing with messy internal conflicts, urban combat, and counter-terror operations that put special units into cramped stairwells, narrow alleys, and apartment blocks instead of open fields. Designers at the Teskie BSOO Bureau in Tula looked at the compact AKS-74U carbine and asked a simple question: what if we turned this into a true close-quarter system that could do almost everything a small assault team needed with one base weapon? The result was the OTs 14 Groza, a bullpup assault rifle that took the Kalashnikov action and moved the trigger and pistol grip forward, placing the magazine and receiver behind the shooter's hand. By doing this, the designers were able to shorten the overall length of the gun dramatically, while keeping a usable barrel length, making it easier to move through doors, vehicles, and tight cover without losing too much ballistic performance. On top of that, they built the whole thing as a modular kit, not just a single fixed configuration. The star of the system was the 9x39mm version, often called Groza 4, which fired heavy subsonic cartridges designed to hit hard at short to medium ranges, even against protected targets. Those rounds were already being used in specialized suppressed weapons like the AS-VAL and the VSS, so the idea was to bring that same heavy punch into a compact bullpup that could also carry a grenade launcher under the barrel. For units storming buildings or working in cities, the concept looked perfect on paper. A rifle that could stay short, hit hard through armor or light cover, and throw grenades from the same platform. What made the Groza special, at least in theory, was how far the modularity went. A basic kit could include a rifle with an integrated 40mm launcher, another front end with just a vertical foregrip and muzzle device, and the option to screw on a suppressor for stealth work. In other words, the same core receiver and barrel could appear in different roles, from compact patrol carbine to suppressed assault rifle, just by swapping front modules and accessories. The designers even produced other calibers on paper and in small numbers. There were versions intended for the classic 7.62 KEK39 cartridge and experimental models in 5.45 VEG39 and 5.56 X45, trying to appeal both to domestic requirements and possible export customers. On a spec sheet, this looked like the dream of every quartermaster and special operations commander, one family of weapons standardized around a common core, with different kits for each mission. Ergonomically, the bullpup layout brought clear advantages for certain jobs. With the action moved back, the Groza could stay short enough to be used comfortably in vehicles, stairwells, and tight corners, while still having a barrel that let the 939 round do its job. A raised carrying handle on top provided a place for iron sights and, at least in theory, optics, which was forward-thinking for Russian small arms of that period. If you look only at the concept, you can see why its reputation grew far beyond the actual number of rifles produced. In photos and demonstrations, you see a compact, aggressive-looking bullpup with a big grenade launcher under the front, a powerful subsonic round, and the promise that operators could reconfigure it on demand. For Western audiences who discovered it later through games and movies, it almost looked like a gun from the future that somehow leaked into the real world in the 1990s. From the perspective of Russian internal troops and some Spetsnaz units, the Groza seemed at first like a natural evolution. They were already familiar with the AKS-74U, compact carbines, and underbarrel grenade launchers like the GP-25. So combining those roles into one integrated bullpup system looked like a logical next step. Add in the armor-piercing capability of 9x39 and the availability of a detachable suppressor, and the brochure almost wrote itself. For command staff, the modular idea also promised logistic simplicity. In theory, one line of spares, one training cycle on a single core weapon, and then various add-on modules to tailor the gun without needing a completely different rifle for each new task. In a time when budgets were tight and operations were chaotic, the dream of a universal close combat weapon was very attractive. So at this point in the story, the Groza looks like a weapon that should have been everywhere, especially in the hands of elite units doing close quarters work. It had a respected design bureau behind it, a clever modular system, and a cartridge tailored for the kind of brutal urban fights Russia was facing. The question then is not whether the idea was bold, but why such a promising concept never really escaped the limited world of small batches and special kits. To answer that, we need to flip to the other side of the equation, day-to-day reality, where ergonomics, training, logistics, and money decide if a brilliant design becomes a standard issue tool or just a rare curiosity in a few armories. That is where the Groza's story starts to get a lot less glamorous, and where the cracks in that promise of versatility begin to show. When you start looking at reports from units that actually used the OT's 14 Groza, a pattern appears quickly. The concept was clever, but the execution made the gun harder to live with than many expected. One of the first pain points was the control layout, especially on the versions that combined the rifle with the integrated 40mm grenade launcher. To save space and maintain the bullpup's compact profile, the designers created a single trigger group meant to operate both the rifle and the launcher, switching between them with a selector on the side. On paper, that sounds elegant: one trigger, one grip, two weapons. In practice, under stress, needing to rotate a selector a full half turn to change from firing bullets to firing grenades proved awkward and slow. In close combat, where seconds and fine motor skills are both in short supply, that kind of control scheme is not just inconvenient, it can be dangerous. The bullpup layout itself, while compact, introduced its own set of issues. Putting the action and magazine behind the grip meant the rifle became noticeably rear-heavy, which felt strange for shooters used to front-balanced AKs with under-barrel launchers. That rear-heavy balance also made certain ready positions and transitions more fatiguing over long periods, especially for operators in full gear. Another side effect of the bullpup configuration was the short sight radius. With the rear sight on the carrying handle and the front sight not very far forward, the distance between them was limited compared to a full-length rifle. That made precise aiming at the edge of the weapon's effective range more challenging, especially under field conditions where lighting, stress, and movement are far from ideal. Then there is the issue of left-handed use and gas blowback. Because the Groza inherited much of its internal behavior from the Kalashnikov family, the ejection port and gas system behaved in a familiar way, but now much closer to the shooter's face. With a suppressor fitted, increased back pressure could push gas and debris straight out of the ejection port, directly into the operator's eyes and nose, making long strings of suppressed fire uncomfortable and, for some, almost unbearable. For left-handed shooters, things were even worse. The unchanged ejection pattern meant hot cases and gas were directed toward the left side, making true left shoulder firing extremely difficult and, in some conditions, practically impossible. In a modern context where ambidextrous handling and shoulder transitions are valued, that limitation was a serious drawback. Beyond ergonomics, the much-touted modularity brought hidden costs. Each configuration required specific parts, forends, triggers and accessories that all had to be produced, stored, tracked and kept in working order. In a perfect, well-funded logistics system, that complexity might be manageable, but in the rough reality of 1990s Russia, with budget cuts and chaotic supply chains, maintaining a modular ecosystem around a niche weapon was a big challenge. Ammunition was another bottleneck. The 9x39 cartridge is excellent for its role, providing heavy subsonic bullets that punch above their weight in urban fighting and against armor. But it is more specialized and more expensive than standard intermediate rounds, and not every unit or depot is set up to keep a reliable stock of it for widespread issue. Because of that, some versions of the Groza were explored in the classic 7.62x39 caliber, and even in 5.45 and 5.56, trying to marry the bullpup concept with more common ammunition. However, those variants stayed mostly at prototype or limited trial level, with funding and interest drying up before they could enter real mass production. Once again, the promise of one family for all needs was undercut by the messy realities of budgets and priorities. When Russian forces compared the Groza to what they already had, the picture became even less favorable. An AK-74 or AKS-74U with a GP-25 grenade launcher, while longer and less integrated, was simpler, familiar, and backed by huge existing stocks of parts, training, and ammunition. Commanders had to ask themselves whether the gains in compactness and theoretical versatility justified the cost of introducing a relatively complex, limited production bullpup. Field feedback seems to have answered that question with a cautious no. Only a few hundred Groza kits were produced, issued mostly to select internal security and special units, and some saw combat in places like Chechnya. Over time, many of those rifles reportedly ended up spending more time in armories than on active duty, as units defaulted back to more conventional platforms that were easier to support. There is also the human factor. Operators are more likely to trust a weapon that feels intuitive and forgiving under stress, even if it is not the most modern thing on paper. The Groza's unusual balance, control scheme, and sensitivity to configuration choices meant it demanded more training and adaptation, and not every unit had the time or resources to give it the attention it needed. So where exactly did the promise of versatility break down? First, in the controls, where the single-trigger, two-weapon idea was clever but clumsy under real-world stress. Second, in ergonomics, with rear-heavy balance, short sight radius, and poor left-handed usability, creating friction for shooters. Third, in logistics and funding, where modular kits and specialized ammo met tight budgets and conservative procurement decisions. And finally, in competition with simpler, established systems that already did good enough at a fraction of the cost and complexity, even if they were longer or less elegant from an engineer's point of view. In the end, the Groza became less a universal solution and more a fascinating, limited-run experiment that proved how hard it is to turn a bold concept into a widely adopted standard. Today, the OTs 14 lives on more in photos, museum pieces and video games than in regular frontline service, which is ironic for a weapon designed for the most practical, ugly kind of fighting, close and fast. Its story is a reminder that in small arms design, versatility on paper is only the first step. True success demands ergonomics, logistics, and doctrine to line up as well. And that is where the Groza's thunderstorm of ideas faded into a drizzle of real-world limitations. If you stayed with me until now, thank you for your time and attention exploring the rise and fall of the OTs 14 Groza's big promise. This kind of weapon shows how even brilliant ideas can stumble when they hit the reality of human ergonomics, logistics, and budget. And that is exactly the kind of story we break down here, mixing history, engineering, and a bit of myth-busting in a way that anyone can follow. So if you like understanding not just how a gun works, but why some projects never became what their designers dreamed of, consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because each new video dives into another weapon that tried to rewrite the rules, and some that actually did. And now tell in the comments, do you think a modernized Groza-style system with better ergonomics and controls could finally deliver on that promise of true versatility? Or is this concept destined to stay as a beautiful failure from the 1990s?